that we're actually not, I wasn't going to start with this, but it worked out, so that's fine. So, all right, so let's all go back together and we'll talk about this a little bit. So today, we're getting into, Earl laid the foundation of what we're doing for this series last week. Today, we're going to jump in to talk about secular humanism and how we do apologetics with a secular humanistic world that we live in. All right, everybody ready? Okay, so just a little, this is the basic breakdown of every worldview that's out there. This is extremely basic, okay? This is not in-depth, but almost every worldview can be broken down into these different categories, okay? So number one, only the universe exists. There's people that believe that. That would what we would call secular humanism or atheism. That means they believe that only the universe is the only thing that exists. Number two, only God exists. That means Hinduism and Buddhism. What I mean by that is they believe that the universe and God are the same thing. We never leave the universe and we are reincarnated in the universe. So God and universe are linked. We never leave it. So we're always here in this. And then the last one is the universe and God both exist. So this would be Christianity, Judaism, Islam, that we believe that the universe is real, we live in it, we're created beings, but God is also real. And there's a spiritual realm up there where God resides. So every worldview essentially can be broken down into this. Now there's thousands of things underneath each one. But this is just a very basic way of breaking down the different worldviews. So today we're going to talk about secular humanism though. Secular humanism is a philosophy, belief system, or life stance that embraces human reason, logic, secular ethics, and philosophical naturalism, while specifically rejecting religious dogma, supernaturalism, and superstition as the basis of morality and decision-making. Ooh, that's a lot, huh? Yeah. So it is the belief that humanity is capable of morality and self-fulfillment without belief in God. Okay? That's the idea behind it. An essential part of secular humanism is a continually adapting search for truth, primarily through science and philosophy, and many secular humanists derive their moral codes from a philosophy of utilitarianism, ethical naturalism, or evolutionary ethics. And some advocate a science of morality. So the basic part of secular humanism is that they believe that morality is subjective. Okay, and we're going to talk about that. Y'all just talk about this, but we're going to talk about this in a second. Okay, and they believe that the end of all being, the end of all things, the goal of all things is the happiness of man. That's the goal. The goal is what can we do to achieve that? Not what Christianity says, which is the end of all being is the glory of God, that all things glorify Him. Secular humanism says, no, the end of all being is the happiness of mankind. How can we achieve that? Through whatever means necessary. That is the basic foundation of secular humanism. So humanism grew in popularity during the Age of Enlightenment of the 17th and the 18th centuries. Humanistic values were reinforced by advances in science and technology, giving confidence to humans in their exploration of the world. So by the early 20th century, organizations dedicated to humanism flourished in Europe and the United States and have since expanded worldwide. Starting in the 20th century, humanist movements are typically 20th century have since expanded worldwide. And most humanist movements are non-religious and aligned with secularism. Most frequently, humanism refers to a non-theistic view centered on human agency. So instead of God being the center of the universe, man is the center of the universe, and that's the goal. That's what secular humanism is. So the reason why for defining this term is that this is the root, okay? This is the root. Whenever we talk about apologetics, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but apologetics, a lot of the times, we have to be careful when we're trying to defend the faith that we're not caught in chopping off a bunch of branches, but we never get to the root. You see? And we do that a lot sometimes because we're like, well, that's dumb. That's a dumb argument. That's a dumb argument. And but we're not really getting to the root of it. Secular humanism is the root of what we're going to talk about today. And so that's why we're spending time, because it is the foundation. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone where you know, and the other person knows, that you have just dismantled their argument? You ever been in a conversation like that? They know it, and you know it. Yet, how many times does that person say, you got me there. You're right. I'm wrong. I'm right. It's kind of like the example of our kids wanting to go stay at a friend's house. You provide them with an argument as to why not. Hey, we're going to have a family night tonight. We're going to watch movies tonight. We're going to hang out together as a family night, so I don't want you to go stay at a friend's house tonight. How many times do they come back to you and say, oh my gosh, that is such a logical reason as to why I can't go to my friend's house. That makes total sense. Dad, of course. And they submit. No, right? Why? Because at the center of their desire is their own desire. Their heart is set on something that even if you provide logical arguments to dismantle it, it doesn't matter because their heart is set on it. Secular humanism is that. It is set on a certain goal of the happiness of mankind as the primary goal, and so that's where everything else derives from. So we see this at the beginning when the serpent tempted Eve with a question that was rooted in humanistic individualism. A question that got the mind of Eve thinking about how she didn't need God, and in fact, God was holding back something from her. He was holding it back from her. And so the serpent said, you're not going to really die, insinuating you're missing out on something. He's holding something back. Reject him and go after this. Now, this is where, with the gospel of Jesus Christ, every human has a plight. The plight of humankind is in two things. We are sinners, which we all agree with, but we're also rebels, which we don't always agree with. But those are two major issues with humanity. What we see at the fall with Eve is not just that she broke the law of God. That's true, she did. But she also rebelled against the law of God. And so that's why Scripture says in Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Right? So that means we've broken the law of God. Everybody agrees with that. Everybody here has done something to break God's law. But the problem with us as well is we desire to break God's law. You see? That's a whole other issue. So now what deals with that? This is why when Jesus says, unless a man is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of heaven. Why? Because being born again deals with that rebel heart that we all have. And that's why it says in Ezekiel 36, this is a promise of the new covenant. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you, remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you. And it says this, and cause you to walk in my statutes. That's what God says. So I'm going to change your whole heart and give you a new heart so that the things you used to love that I hate, you now hate. The things that I love that you used to hate, you now love. And this is why it's so important when we present the gospel is that we're presenting both things. Okay? Because why? Because it deals with secular humanistic ideas that is inside of the heart of every human. Okay? All right. So, what is the results of this secular humanistic worldview that has infiltrated our society and the world? I'm going to talk about just two. There's a bunch of other things we could have talked about. We had a whole lot of things on the schedule, but we're not going to be able to talk about them. So I'm going to talk about two of them today. Number one is going to be the rise of atheism is number one. Number two is going to be a society that is devoid of morality. All right. Atheism is the lack of belief in God. Agnosticism is the belief that nothing is known or can be known about the existence or nature of a God or a deity. From this secular humanistic worldview, you have people who began to promote a belief system. They wouldn't call it that, by the way. They don't call it belief system. They don't call atheism a belief system. But when you get down to it, you realize they believe it. So, or they'll say, well, we have confidence that this is the right way. And if you didn't know, the Latin word for confidence is fide, which is the word faith. Anyways, they began to promote that everything that we do as humans can be attributed to our own choices, our own intuition, our own capabilities, our own morality, and we don't need God. So if you truly press people who have an atheistic worldview, you will see that they actually live like they believe that God actually does exist by the things they do and they say, but they will say that they're doing it not because of that. When they are pressed on areas of morality, historical proof, the establishment and success of Christian cultures compared to all other cultures, the advancement of science and nature, or the origin of life, they end up at a spot where they will assert a God of the gaps. Anybody know what God of the gaps is? Somebody tell me. What is God of the gaps? Go ahead.
I think it's where the fossils don't match.
Okay.
So they say, okay, God.
They insert God in the mystery, essentially. Yes. So, and that's one of the arguments against Christianity is they say, well, y'all just assert God into all these things that you don't know. We say it's science, and we haven't figured it out yet. And that's one of their arguments. But you'll notice that a lot of the times they will get to a point where they will say, yes, that's a mystery, or yes, that's unknown, or it's unrealized knowledge, and they're asserting unrealized knowledge the same way that maybe Christians will say, well, it's just God. So let me give you an example. How many of you have heard of Richard Dawkins? Okay, Richard Dawkins is a prominent atheist and author. He's a biologist, extremely brilliant man. And he believes in the Big Bang Theory, where a self-replicating single-cell molecule arose, bringing about life as we know it today over the course of 13.8 billion years. When asked about where this single-cell, self-replicating molecule comes from, Richard Dawkins often says that he doesn't know. He doesn't know where it comes from. But just recently, Richard has said that he is open to an idea that there is an alien race out there that is extremely advanced scientifically and technology-wise that might have built the earth and created that single-cell molecule today. He's also open to the idea of some sort of supercomputer that might have used science to bring about planet Earth and humanity, but he still believes that even the supercomputer or the alien race had to have some place that it comes from. So what he is asserting as a supercomputer is what we call God. You see? What he's saying is this. We're saying, you're saying the same thing except not God, because it goes against your worldview, right? And so Richard Dawkins often asks Christians, if there is a God, well then who created God? But the problem is, no Christian believes in a created God. Nobody believes in a created God. God is not created. He is the creator. He is timeless and spaceless. He is outside of all of these things. He's beyond all things. So earlier, when we started, I had you guys split up and answer those questions. So the difference between objective and subjective, just for those that may not know, is that objective information is based on facts, and subjective information is based on opinion, emotion, or feelings. Okay? That's the difference between the two. So an example is, how many of you know what this movie is? Yeah. Okay. So some people know this movie, and you may say, that movie is way too long. How many agree it's way too long? I don't think it's too long. I love it. But anyways, all right. So you would say, that movie is way too long. Well, that is not an objective fact. That's a subjective feeling. But if you say, Castaway is 2 hours and 23 minutes long. Well, that's an objective fact, because it actually is 2 hours and 23 minutes long, right? So that's an objective fact. Subjectively, you would say, well, it's too long. Well, that's your opinion. That's based upon your emotional or the fact you don't like volleyballs with blood on them or something like that, okay? But when y'all split up and you discussed these two questions, let's go back to the questions real quick. No, the other way. Yeah. There is no objective truth. Truth is subjective. There is no objective morality. Morality is subjective. What were some arguments that you came up with to combat somebody that would say these things? Just throw some stuff out there.
Is that statement an objective truth?
Yes, and that's what we're going to talk about.
The first thing that comes up to mind is, okay, obviously you've got to define the word objective and subjective, so
Yeah.
we know facts and feelings.
Sure.
The second thing is, when we talk about truth and morality, what are the guidelines that we're going to use? We got to set a set of rules that we're going to play by, so because otherwise your truth can be whatever you're thinking it is.
Yes, very good.
So I want to set the rules first.
Right, and that's what we're going to get into. That's a really good point, though. Yes, absolutely. What else? Anybody else? Okay. By definition, it can't be truth. It can be subjective ideas, but not truth. Good. So, number one, as you noted, if you didn't notice, these are objective statements. So what oftentimes happens is people will make objective claims to claim there is no objective claims, which is a self-defeating argument. That happens a lot, especially whenever you're talking to somebody. They're making claims that something is 100%, that it's not 100%. So really, what are you saying? You're not saying anything, because you've just defeated your own argument of what you're trying to say. If there is evil, then there must be something that we call good. Would you agree? Or vice versa, okay? If there is good, then there must be a way to decipher between good and evil. How would you decipher between that, good and evil? If there's a way to decipher between good and evil, then that must mean that there is a law or a standard in which to decipher between good and evil. If there is a law or standard that must mean that there is somebody who gave the law or the standard. There must be a lawgiver to be able to determine between that. You see? So this is how this works, is that everybody agrees that's what it is. And we're not going to get into this, but many on the secular humanist idea will say that morality is subjective, but when they're pressed to it, they don't really live that way, and they would never really want to live in a world where really everything is subjective. That's very dangerous. So they don't really want that, but they can't say it's objective, because then it puts them into a position where there has to be somebody who's giving this objective, that is defining those terms. And then no matter what culture you live in, let's say the worst things, we're not going to say them because there's kids in here, but let's just say the worst things you can think of are bad there and here. It's all bad because it's an objective law that's there. So I just got a couple things here. Is when you engage with somebody that may be an atheist or agnostic, you have to start with an agreement on a foundation of truth. The need for a basis of truth that is needed in any conversation that you have. Whenever you talk with someone about anything, there has to be this agreement that you come to. For instance, if someone doesn't believe that the Bible is the Word of God, then to quote from it is to use a tool that they don't agree is legit. So if you're quoting the Bible at them to try to convince them of something, they're not listening to that because they don't believe that it's true. You see? So you would need to start with another area where there is an agreement of truth. And this right here is where the majority of arguments become unproductive, because you are arguing about something where there is no common ground. For instance, what you could do is you could start with the fact of the historical Jesus, for instance. It's an objective fact that a man named Jesus was from Nazareth, who lived in Galilee and was crucified on a cross. Okay, that's a well-known objective fact that it happened. Right? So if you're wanting to talk to somebody, now you have a baseline where they can agree that that's a fact. You can agree that they may not, because that does happen. And just understand that you're not always going to have everybody that agrees with the facts of stuff. But now you have at least somewhere to springboard off of. Okay, so now what do you believe about that Jesus character? What do you believe he did? What was he? Why is he talked about? Why is the timeline based on him? I mean, there's all these questions that you could then go from that foundation of a baseline of truth. All right, but number two, you have to understand you are not a debater, you're an ambassador. In apologetics, you are not a debater, you're an ambassador. There's people in there, and most of us, how many of you like to watch debates? Okay, a good amount. Okay, good. I do too. How many of you know it's very likely none of us will ever be on a debate stage? Yes. How many of you know that the way that formal debates work is not the way that it works in real life? You're not setting a timer and say, okay, you got 3 minutes. Prove it, I'm gonna rebut your argument. Right? That's not the way it happens. It happens as you're having coffee. You're having a meal. You're talking at church. You're doing this. And it's just normal, intimate, organic kind of conversations that just come about. And so we have to understand that we're not debaters, and nobody has been debated into the kingdom of God. Okay? That's not the way that it's going to work. We're going to be ambassadors of Christ, but we have to be prepared and know some of these things. In Colossians chapter 4, well, let me just read this quote. I read this the other day, and it says, the problem with dropping the mic is that you forfeit the ability to be heard. Anybody ever heard the term drop the mic? Like you burn somebody, you're like, yeah, got him. The problem, though, is that you are now forfeiting the opportunity for them to actually learn about what you just said that may be true. You're not trying to stump people. You're trying to help people. You're trying to open up the eyes of the blind so that they can turn from darkness to light. Okay? So we're ambassadors. In Colossians chapter 4, verses 5 and 6 says, walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always, underline always, be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. So he's saying that your conduct towards outsiders needs to be important, and your speech needs to be important. So what you're doing and walking and the way you act is really important. People are watching that. But it's also the way that you talk to people. In 1 Peter 2:12, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Okay, so those are just some just basic things of how to have conversations with people that may have an atheistic worldview. You have to come to a baseline of truth. What do you agree on? And then you're able to then go from there. But your job is not to stump them. Your job is to be an ambassador of Christ for them. And listen to them. Talk with them. Okay? Now, we're going to go to this next part of a society that's devoid of objective moral standards. I want to just talk about one thing today because we don't have a whole lot of time. Go ahead. Sure.
It seems to me, I don't know, just musing, that what you just said applies like when we're talking to our Hindu friends.
Yes.
It across the board. It applies everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you're talking to anyone.
Yes.
Listening.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing them, because you may get lost in that first one that we even talked about, who Jesus is.
Mm-hmm.
Their understanding of who he is
Totally different.
totally different.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I agree, and that is, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this series is to talk about how do you have these conversations with people, but understand that you got to be patient. You got to listen, to them, and not try to just, win the argument against them. So I want to just talk about one area in society where we are seeing the moral degradation happening, and that is with the subject of abortion. Okay? Abortion is obviously a hot topic now with election coming up, and many Christians are beginning to discuss the morality behind it. Let me just say that the historical stance on abortion, if you want to read all the church fathers from I don't know if you ever heard the Didache, which was written in 70 AD, it mentions and goes against anybody that's going to be having an abortion. I mean, the church history on abortion has been the same. It is against God's law. It is abhorrent to God. But the number one argument that many Christians use for why abortion is wrong is because we believe that humanity is created in God's image. That's the number one argument that's used. We are created in God's image. Now, these right here are going to be, what do we mean by that? What do we mean that we're made in God's image? This is typically what we put together for what it means to be in God's image. These are qualities that we have. And so we would say, well, to be an image bearer means that we have intelligence compared to a lizard. Reasoning ability, emotions, the ability to commune with God, self-awareness or sentience, language, communication ability, the presence of a soul or spirit, free will. I don't know why that went way down there, but conscience. Now, these are things that we describe as this is why humans are made in God's image. This is why abortion is wrong in God's eyes. And all of these are true things. These are all strong arguments for being made in the image of God. But when you really begin to look at each one of these in light of Scripture and then in light of reality, some of them don't always fit. Okay? So why do these fail? Some of these fail. Because you cannot say that these things are all present equally in all people. Okay? You can't say everybody. What if you have somebody that's born with a disability? Their intelligence is not the normal level of intelligence. What do you do with that? What about somebody's in a coma? Well, they're not conscious. They're not self-aware, right? So you start getting into these questions. And I'm saying this because this is the actual arguments that people bring up that are pro-abortion or pro-choice. This is what they bring up. And so this is why we have to talk about it, because they're like, well, wait a second, what about this person? He's in a coma, so you don't care about him. You just care about, the baby. It cannot be said to be actually present in all people, all of these, and some of these are not unique to only humanity or humankind. So like I said, what about people in comas? Do they lose the image of God? What about babies that are born with birth defects that limit their intelligence? Do they lose the image of God? There's actually, we'll talk about this in a second, but the problem with defining the image by any of these qualities is that on one hand, non-human beings like animals possess some of these abilities, although not to the same extent as humans. If one animal anywhere at any time learned anything contrary to instinct or communicated intelligently to other species or within species, or displayed an emotional response, that means that we would rule these things out as being unique to only humanity. Are you following me? Well, a dog, anybody ever seen a dog that has a best friend that dies and they cry? Oh, it's so sad. Well, why are they doing that, right? Not only that, but there's actually a study going on now. It's called animal cognition, where they're actually studying the cognitive abilities of animals, right? And so they everybody know, anybody have chickens? You ever chickens, like at nighttime they go and they roost, right? And so they're studying, like, why are they doing that? How do they know how to do that? Is it instinct? Is it this? Is it this? And most of us would say we would never let our 2-year-old figure out how to make their way back home, but we do with a chicken, But not only that, but artificial intelligence is now on the brink of things, right? Anybody see the Tesla robot thing? I don't know what that thing's called. But, there's this robot that is having conversations with people. Well, in 20, 50, 100 years, what if the next round of humans say that person is a human because they're able to do the X, Y, Z? They have these certain qualities that also humans have. You see how it's starting to go on this line. Michael Heiser says this: defining image bearing as any ability is a flawed approach. The pro-life position is based on the proposition that human life, and so personhood, begins at conception, the point when the female egg is fertilized by the male sperm. The simple-celled zygote inside a woman's womb, which pro-lifers believe to be a human person, is not self-aware. It has no intelligence, rational thought processes, or emotions. It cannot speak or communicate. It cannot commune with God or pray. And it cannot exercise its will or respond to the conscience. If you want to argue that those things are there potentially, then that means you have a potential person, which is a pro-life argument. Potential personhood is not actual personhood. This thought process would mean that abortion is not killing until personhood is achieved. And that's the pro-choice position. Now, some of you may be saying, well, what about humans? Humans have a soul and a spirit. And we're not going to get into all of this, but just so you know, the Hebrew word for soul is nafesh, and it's talked about how humans have that in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, but it also says that in Genesis 1:21 that animals have a nafesh. What about spirit? Well, that's the Hebrew word ruach, and we know that humans have a spirit within them, but it also says in Ecclesiastes 3:21 that the spirits of beasts, when they die. So you got this weird thing. I thought that was what it was. So we don't have these list of qualities that make us the image bearers? the turning point is, what do we mean by the preposition in? Okay? What do we mean by that? We have been made in God's image. In English, we use the preposition in to denote many different ideas. For example, if I say I put the dishes in the sink, I'm using the preposition to denote location. If I say I broke the mirror in pieces, I'm using in to denote the result of some action. If I say I work in education, I'm using the preposition to denote that I work as a teacher or principal or some kind of other educational person. Okay, you follow me? You okay? You uncomfortable? I hope so. Next, this is Michael Heiser says this. He says, humankind was created as God's image. If we think of imaging as a verb or function, that translation makes sense. We are created to image God, to be His imagers. It is what we are by definition. The image is not an ability we have, but a status. We are God's representatives on earth, and so to be human is to image God. To use the image of God argument as only a noun means that invariably we will get to a point where some of the things that define the noun or qualities of the noun don't make sense for an unborn baby in a womb. Like whenever you see a statue, we see a statue and we can see the set of qualities to determine what the statue represents. Is it a human, animal, mythological creature, or whatever? But that's not the fullness of what it means to be in the image of God. Imaging God is something we do by being human. So when we use it as a verb, it means to make an image, to portray or to project on a surface. It is in a very real sense. Being made in God's image means you are projecting God on earth wherever you are and whatever you look like. Whether you're in the womb or whether you're sitting in pews, you image God. Are you following me? So this is why, this reason why this is important is because if we get into the arguments, like I said earlier, if we get into the arguments of all the branches and we're like, well, they have this and they have this, and what about this and what about this? The fact of the matter is, Scripture says we have been created in God's image, which means we have been created to image God. That's why when you kill a baby in the womb, you are killing something that was meant to image who God is on the earth. Doesn't mean that they just have a set of qualities. No, the reason why it's abhorrent to God is you are killing somebody who's meant to go forth and image who God is across the globe, which is exactly after He created Adam and Eve. What did He say? Go out, take my kingdom, take my image out into the whole world. Go out and do it. And we know sin comes. But this is why this is an important aspect of why abortion is coming from a secular humanistic idea, and it is now being, put out there. And the reason why we stand against it is because you are destroying the only people that God has created to image Him on the earth and to be representatives of His goodness, His justice, His mercy, and that's what you're doing. This is why it's so bad. Does that make sense? And not only that, but it also provides people with hope. You're a baby in a womb. You're meant to image God. You have a purpose. You have a plan. You're not just supposed to be born and die. You have a plan to go out. The plan from the very beginning is go out and be my image. Demonstrate my goodness. Demonstrate my glory. And that's what we're supposed to do. Does that make sense? Anybody got any questions or comments? Go ahead.
A couple of comments. This is kind of off subject, but not really. The only creature, now, what was the first thing that Adam and Eve recognized whenever after they sinned? They recognized when they spoke to God, they recognized their nudity.
Mm-hmm.
No other creature on earth recognizes nudity, and no other creature on earth hides sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Period. That speaks to our fallen nature, but it speaks at the same time to the family being the center unit of God's purpose among men. And the second point, a totally unrelated point, but the ultimate end of the humanist argument is where Satan is.
Yes. Good point.
He is in the bottom
Yes, right.
That's the ultimate degree.
Of humanism. Good. Amen. I agree. Yes. That's why it's so important. And that's why, as it is penetrating every area of our society, we're understanding why we're seeing what we're seeing today happen, is because of that, is because Satan is there. Satan's doing the work, and it leads to destruction. And that's why we're seeing these things. Good.
Can I also say that on the abortion topic, defining where life is and the value of life, and especially like in America, where we have, rights as humans and different things, the argument that, the fetus or anything is not alive, to me just kind of goes against, a lot of what God has said. Like, He is the giver of life, right? And so then when we are the ones that are taking that away, I mean, I just don't understand how that, like, by not defining where life begins, I think that's where we've kind of gotten to this point as well. And then even to the point of, like, there's a problem with the baby, or there's something that is wrong that's going to become like a lifelong debilitating whatever. There's no guarantee that even when you have a perfectly healthy baby, that baby would not end up with some debilitating illness or something that would affect them. So then can you kill that child after they've had that accident or something that has changed once they were born, healthy? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I don't know.
Well, I think, and I agree, but and those are all you have a lot of different areas when it comes to the subject of abortion that you can talk about, and I think a lot of them are branches off of roots, and the real root is that the majority, throughout church history, you can read of examples throughout church history, and even up till today, you see the main reason for it is self-preservation. That's the main reason why people are doing it. For primarily, 99% of abortions are used as a form of birth control. And that's the way it is. We can talk about all the peripheral things that are there, but the fact of the matter is that as you are coming in and you're doing that, you are destroying something that God has planned from the beginning to be the only thing that could image Him on the earth, which is humanity. Go ahead.
Another thing that's important it is determining who is God. Because God said, don't take and acknowledging that He has authority over us, that we should obey Him, as opposed to secular humanism that says there is no God.
Right.
I am God. I get to choose.
Yes.
At that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's number one. The other thing I find interesting is that they will say that that's not really life, that an unborn child really has a life. But if you kill an endangered species that is pregnant, you'll get fined twice. Because they acknowledge that there's a life alive inside that endangered animal. So they hold a higher value to an unborn animal, than they do for.
Right. And that just shows the horrendous aspect of secular humanism, like you said. Go ahead.
I took a worldview class in high school, and something that my teacher, when we were talking about secularism and humanism, stuck out to me, was it's the sun versus the moon. Secular humanism, you are the sun. Everything revolves around you, you control everything around you, you are the center of your solar system, universe. As a Christian, our job is to be a full moon. Our job is to reflect the sun into a dark world.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, this secular humanist thing is in the culture, but there is stuff that's inside of all of us. That's why Jesus says, whoever wants to follow me must take up his cross daily and follow me. And what are you crucifying daily? You're crucifying that desire to live for yourself, to advance yourself, your own desires, your own pleasures. We all are fighting against those things. The thing is, we have the Holy Spirit doing it with us, So go ahead, one more, and then we got to go.
This may be a longer answer than you want to deal with, but one of the big issues when you're speaking with an atheist is getting that person to comprehend or accept the fact that there is a spiritual realm.
Yes.
If there is no spiritual realm, then there's no God. If there is a spiritual realm, there necessarily is a God. How do you, in your mind, get them over that hump?
Well, I think that one of the things, well, this is a totally different subject, but I think, in my opinion, the whole thing that's happening with the UFO type stuff like that, I think is going to start opening up people's minds to start thinking more about a spiritual realm. That's just my opinion, could be wrong, but that's just a side note. But I think that getting them to understand that there are things that they can't explain and that there's a spiritual option that's there. I don't think you can convince them. I think you provide it, this is a spiritual option, and let me walk you through why I think the things that you can't explain are actually spiritual. Boom, boom, boom. And then you get into the argument maybe of, well, what, they may say, well, we just think it's a mystery of whatever. But I think that it's trying to present arguments that at least get their mind moving in that direction, I think is the only way you can really do it. So, all right, I'm going to